Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 144. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, October the 19th, from the James Strong studio in western St. Charles County. And this may be the earliest I've ever recorded a podcast. It's 5:50 in the morning. And I've been up for a while writing the podcast, but busy day, and I wanted to get the podcast in the morning. I've received notices from folks that say they appreciate it if they have the podcast as early as possible on a Saturday morning, because that's when folks like to listen. I guess the old habits die hard. It's been a couple, 3 years since I've been on the radio for my morning broadcast, but I think just that's when people like to listen. So when I can, I will have the podcast published by early as possible on Saturday morning. How's that? How's that for a commitment with absolutely no, or a commitment with absolutely no basis? The podcast this morning, the essay this morning, it's we got a little bit of potpourri this morning. A few stories that are in the news that I thought were very interesting. But the essay is going to segue in from a potpourri story, and it has to do with the economy, millennials, and home ownership in the U.S. And it's just, the millennials, say what you will about them. You can love them, you can hate them, but they are different from the boomers, okay? And I'll make that statement, and that's a statement that's unrefutable. Millennials are different from the boomers. Their generation is different from my generation. I'm not going to say better. I'm not going to say worse. I will say different. And home ownership is perhaps the number one reason why they are different. And I'll get into that later on in my podcast in the latter part during the essay. My week, first part of the week was in town. Second part of the week was a trip. I was visiting customers in southern Missouri and Arkansas, driving trip. And I had some bad coffee on the trip. Now, me personally, I love coffee. In the morning, if I don't have my morning coffee, I can't function. I really can't. It's hard to. Now, maybe that's an addiction. Maybe it's just a lifestyle, and that's not true. I can function just fine without morning coffee, but things just go in slow motion. If I'm going to catch a 5:30 flight to the airport, I'm not going to get up and drink a pot of coffee before I leave. I'm going to get up, shower, and leave. And I function just fine. I've never missed an airplane. I've never had problems. I just take my time. Excuse me. But if I do have the coffee in the morning, it's got to be the good stuff. For instance, right now, because it's not even 6 o'clock in the morning, I have to drink my Colombian roast coffee, and it's wonderful stuff. Yesterday morning, however, was not the case. Pardon me while I take a sip. But I'm a big fan of the Hilton hotels. Okay, I'm a lifetime Diamond member, which means basically I've stayed in so many Hilton hotels. They've said, "Hey, be a Diamond member forever. If you never stay in another Hilton hotel for the rest of your life, you're still a Diamond member." That's the super elite, top of the rack membership with all the bells and whistles, okay? And Hampton Inns are hotels I stay in a lot because they're reasonably priced. They're very basic hotels. They're clean. They're close by. They're everywhere. And they're relatively inexpensive. And they have good coffee in the morning. But not the Hampton Inn in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where I will never stay again. I woke up at 4:40 in the morning. And I thought, you know what? It's time to start the day, because I had a busy day ahead of me, and I had things that I had to do in the morning before I had my first 8 o'clock appointment. So first thing I do is I go to get coffee. And the first cup was horrible. It was awful. But I drank it. And the coffee was, you could see to the bottom of the cup. So they obviously just made it wrong. But you know what? There were two different pots, a dark roast and a light roast. I usually like the light roast. But I'll try the dark roast. It was just as bad. It was undrinkable. So I dumped the coffee and had to walk across the street to the Waffle House. It's not 5 o'clock in the morning, or it's 5:15 in the morning at this point. And here I am walking across the street in Jonesboro, Arkansas, looking for a good cup of coffee. Found one at the Waffle House, came back, enjoyed it, got my work done. But that being said, there's in today's day and age, okay, with high tech, with machinery doing everything that you can possibly imagine, there is never, ever, ever an excuse for bad coffee, bad beer, or bad wine, okay? Because everything is done, the machinery that is used is exact. I have a Cuisinart coffee maker here at home. You measure out the scoops, you grind it, you grind the beans to a certain level, you dump it in a certain type of filter, you fill the water to a certain level on the reservoir, you hit the go button, and it drips into the pot. Same coffee all the time. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Beer is the same way. Everything that touches a beer is stainless steel. It's all clean. All of the ingredients are metered, and they do it the same way every time. In fact, I think some of you may remember, I've told the story more than once. I'm a big beer fan, and I'm a big craft beer fan. But my favorite beer in the world is a lager. And you rarely see the craft beer companies making lagers. You do so more now, but back in the infancy of the craft beer world, they didn't make lagers. And I interviewed a gentleman from Second Shift Brewing in New Haven one time. And I asked him, I said, why don't microbrewers brew lager beer? And he smiled and said, basically, because we can't do it as good as Budweiser. So why would you pay twice as much for something that's not quite as good? Because the big brewing companies especially, everything is done with computers, everything is exact. And that's why when you pop a Budweiser or a Miller or any of the big legacy beers, they're going to be the same. There's never an excuse for bad beer. Same thing with wine. There's no such thing as bad wine anymore. Now, there may be wines that you don't like, but that's because of the grape. Personally, I'm not a big fan of Moscato. That's not because Moscato is not a good wine. It's because it's a grape that's too sweet and it just doesn't appeal to me, okay? It's not a bad bottle of wine. It's a bottle of wine that has a taste that I don't care for. Big difference. Because wine is not, the grapes aren't picked by hand, thrown in a wooden tub, stomped on by a lady, and then stuck in a wooden barrel anymore. No. They're picked by machines, they're sorted by machines, they're washed by machines, and they're all put into a sanitized stainless steel vat, and they're aged. And that's why some of the wine companies that are selling the most wines are some of the companies like Inglenook and Gallo. Those were wines once upon a time that were just the cheapy, not very good wines. Now they're the cheapy, pretty good wines because they're consistent. So, bad coffee, bad beer, bad wine. If you ever run across a place that has any of the above that are bad, they're not doing their due diligence. They're not even paying attention. And folks, I got bad coffee this week at the Hampton Inn in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The coffee at the Waffle House, by the way, very good. Later that day, I had a coffee at McDonald's, very good. A word about McDonald's, not a fan. I can't remember the last time I ate anything at McDonald's. However, if you're looking for a good, inexpensive, consistent cup of coffee, that's the place to go, McDonald's. The other noticeable, mentionable item on my trip was the car that I had. When I go on these trips, I generally pick a reasonably priced car. And for whatever reason, on this trip, the cars seemed to cost a little more than normal, but that's okay. I rented a mid-sized car, and when I got to Enterprise, my car rental company of choice, they said, mid-sized car, okay. Would you like a brand new Dodge Ram truck? I said, no, I don't want a Dodge Ram truck. I don't want to run up and down the concrete in a truck, a loud, noisy truck that gets 8 miles to the gallon. I don't want to do that. I usually put on a trip like this, 600-700 miles on a car. I'm not going to get something that gets 8 miles to the gallon. They said, okay. Would you take an SUV as a no-charge upgrade? I said, sure, I'll take that. So they gave me a Jeep Grand Cherokee. I'm going to tell you, this vehicle was unbelievable. I've always liked Grand Cherokees, and I'm glad they brought them back because the styling is even better than before. And I'm telling you that the comfort, the styling, it was just a wonderful car. And this car had all the bells and whistles. It had leather. It had cooled seats. It had heated seats. It had a wonderful navigation system and a wonderful audio system, okay? Which is something you normally don't get out of Chrysler, the technology. But this one had up-to-date technology on it. And I'm here to tell you, this car was unbelievable, with one exception. When I got into it, and this is not uncommon with rental cars, it was stinky, okay? So I picked the car up on a Wednesday night. I had to leave early on Thursday morning. So I take the car home, and I wash it out. I take a cloth, and I wipe it down because somebody had smoked in the car. It was obvious. Even though they have no smoking stickers, somebody smoked in the car. It was stinky from smoke. So I wiped it down, kept the windows down, had dinner. Before I went to bed, I rolled the windows up. Came out on Thursday morning, still stinky. No matter what I did, that car was just, it reeked of smoke. And it just bothered me. Every now and then I just have to roll, I'm going down the highway, I just have to roll down the windows to let the air just get out of there because it was just so stinky. 5 minutes later, the stink was back. So I turned the car in, and I told them, I said, they always ask, hey, how was the car? I said, it was wonderful. I liked it. Thank you for the upgrade. But it was stinky. The car just smelled bad of cigarette smoke. I said, when these people smoke in the car, you ought to find them and then clean these things up. And the guy kind of looked at the ground and said, yeah, we did. This particular car, a guy did smoke a lot in it. It was stinky. We dinged him for a $75 fine, cleaned it ourselves, and had it professionally detailed, but we can't get the stink out of it. Well, okay. I mean, he apologized. I said, look, no big deal. It happens. Thanks for the upgrade. Enterprise takes you home after you drop off the car. And so they had a driver taking me home after I dropped off the car at the rental center. And it was a young man the same guy who had picked me up. And we're talking about the car because he drove me home in that same car. And he said, yeah, this is a nice car. How'd you like it? I said, I did, but it was stinky. Can you smell that cigarette smoke? And he laughed. He said, yeah. He said, this car, it only had 16,000 miles on it, which is not a lot for a rental car anymore. He said, when this car was almost brand new, he said, somebody rented it and they smoked a bunch of weed in this car. He said, no matter what we do, we can't get the stink out of it. Now, the other thing about the car that was odd is the paint wasn't right. So I think it had been wrecked and it had two brand new front tires that weren't the same brand as the back tires. In other words, this thing was used and abused, and somehow the two front tires got worn out before 16,000 miles hit the odometer. So this car was driven hard, put away wet, and a lot of pot was smoked in this car, and they just couldn't get rid of the smell. So, yeah, I got the upgrade, but they probably thought, who should we give this car to? How about somebody who's not paying full price? So that being said, I'm not complaining. It was a good experience. I would highly recommend the Jeep Grand Cherokee for anybody wanting to drive a car. I would not, however, recommend the Jeep Grand Cherokee if somebody has smoked a boatload of pot in it sometime in the past. Number 3 on the potpourri, and I posted this on Facebook, and what people do, what people earn, has always amazed me. Pardon me while I take a sip of coffee. And it's not that I'm trying to be nosy, and it's not that I'm jealous of folks, but I'm always interested in what people who are exceptional earn. And this week in the car, I had Sirius XM on, and I heard a couple of songs by Herb Alpert. Okay, remember him? Nobody under 40 probably knows who Herb Alpert was, or is, I should say, because he's not dead. He's 84, and he just put an album out last year, okay? But Herb Alpert was one of the most successful people ever in the music business. Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Remember that? Remember that band? Well, Herb Alpert, in 1966, the Tijuana Brass was so popular. Did you know that the Tijuana Brass sold more records in 1966 than the Beatles? That's how